Hi. Welcome back
Hello.
to Hey. Welcome back to being the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. Today, we have a really awesome guest and a really fun topic. We're going to talk about youth sports and how to help kids have fun, be engaged, and also as a coach, how to help keep your sanity and have fun with it and stay organized as well. So let me go ahead and Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, hey, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. My name is Kevin. I'm a dad. I'm 37 years old. I've got two kids, and I started a hobby last year, this Instagram page where I've sort of documented my experience as a little league baseball coach. This will be my eighth season coaching my son's team, and I live in Central Florida, so baseball is pretty easy for us except for the rain. I get a little bit of rain, and the fields are washed out, and so sometimes we go a little bit of stretches without some practice, but I'm a little league baseball coach. My focus is on that. I try to counteract. There's a big narrative out there about travel ball and pushing your kids to be more competitive and things like that. And I'm very much more focused on just recreation and teaching the kids, the fundamentals of the game, but also playing with their friends and just learning those basic lessons that we all kind of learned as kids before travel ball was ever really a thing. And so my focus is just helping parents that are like me. I work a full time job, 9 to 5. I leave early to get to the baseball field sometimes. I miss games and practices because of work sometimes. And I just try to offer the experience that I have to other parents to encourage them to be coaches and step up if they feel intimidated or to just help out parents who are trying to figure out the whole youth sports culture. So a little bit about myself.
Oh, great. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And definitely, yeah, I like that philosophy of really focusing on, kids having fun. Because I think that's really most important. Because no matter what level a child's playing at, if they're having fun what they're doing, they're going to keep wanting to do it. If it stops becoming fun, they're not going to want to keep playing and they're not going to be as motivated.
100%.
So
100%.
in terms of thinking about with kids, like what do you feel like are some of your go-to tips for, keeping practices fun and keeping kids engaged?
Well, it depends, right? So I started coaching in T-ball, and I know you've coached as well, and now I'm coaching 7 to 9 year olds. So it's different, right? It's different to teach a 5 year old how to catch a ball versus a 9 year old who's still struggling to catch. So it kind of depends on your age group, right? But when I started with T-ball, it was very much about fun. So we would do a lot of games. We would do things that were competitions that would make kids interested in trying to win and trying to focus and trying to pay attention. And I think some of the time we focus a little bit too much on fundamentals. So it really just depends on the kids you're coaching. But for me, it was always about incorporating a little bit of balance between actually showing them how to swing a bat or how to catch a ball or how to throw the ball or hold the ball. But a lot of it is just playing games that get them interested in picking up the ball and holding the laces and doing things with the bat and having some level of interest to spark them as they grow up to be a little bit older and play a little bit more seriously to be able to catch and throw with their friends and that sort of thing. So I incorporate a lot of games still, even though I do 7 to 9 year olds, right? There's kickball that the kids love to play, still very competitive and still something they're interested in, but sort of builds that team bonding experience, right? I do different competitions. We have some practice equipment we use that I try to turn into a mix of skill work and also just, competition and fun and games and this team versus that team. And the winning team can make the other team do push-ups or run to the fence or something like that. Sometimes we play games where it's the coaches versus the kids. And so if the kids do X, Y, or Z, the coaches got to run bases and they love yelling at us while they do that. So anything that sort of balances a little bit of both, in my opinion, is what works for me, where the kids still learn some level of baseball fundamentals, whether to run to that base or not, whether to run when there's a pop fly or not, but also does practices have things incorporated in them that are fun and that are games. I mean, these are still kids. I still like to play games. I don't know if you play board games or video games, but most adults still play games at some level. And so these kids, games are something they can respond to pretty easily. So I try to do a little mix of both. So that also looks like to the parents that they're learning the skill they signed them up for, but that they're also having a good time. And I feel like that's been the best balance that's worked for me in my experience as a coach.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing. I think that's really great advice. And I think it is about that balance of figuring out how to make it fun while also weaving it, learning and ideally, helping them to work on, especially as they get older, it becomes a little bit easier to work on the fundamentals. It's very
Hmm.
different with a 5-year-old trying to teach them to throw and catch. And, the attention span
Absolutely.
is usually not very high at that age. So being
Yeah.
able to kind of work, again, obviously kids still attention span can still be short, But
Hmm.
I think they have a little bit more patience to really work on the skill set. But I think that idea of making it fun, and that idea of competition, I think that can definitely be very helpful to do that. And I think one of the challenges I find sometimes is thinking in generally is the idea that if you have kids who like are super competitive, whereas the point where like it leads to like a meltdown if they don't win, which is
Right.
something obviously kids need to work on. But that can
Right.
be, but in general, this I do think that within reason, I think the idea of a competition can be really helpful because it creates a game out of it. Whether like I like to do like a relay race, for example, just as like a fun sort of beginning or end of practicing sometimes.
Absolutely.
Where you just kind of run around the bases with two teams, or even like a running scrimmage. Basically
Absolutely.
instead of I don't know. I feel like kids sometimes get kind of confused by that, but
Hmm.
when the idea of you're actually pretending about not actually batting. But I think it really helps a lot with the gameplay because
Absolutely.
the game can move faster than if all the kids are batting, and it
Hmm.
also creates a competition of the batting team versus the running team in terms of points.
Right. We're trying to do something where there's never really a kid standing around doing nothing. Now, sometimes that happens inevitably when we're switching stuff up or whatever. But the most that I can keep them engaged. Practices are 90 minutes long. So what is recess at school, like 15 minutes? I mean, I got to keep these kids entertained for an hour and a half, and so they got to stay focused. So we're trying to keep them moving, keep them engaged in something. And like you said, the competition sometimes brings out the little bit of attitude where the kid loses and they're upset, but we use that as a learning opportunity, right? That this is all just a game, and whether you win or lose, it's supporting your team and that sort of thing, and trying again. And sometimes we'll do the games twice, and they often can come back and try to win that time. And it's just teaching them the basic fundamentals that sometimes stuff is going to go your way and sometimes it isn't, and how you respond to that is going to have a big impact in how you will carry on the rest of your day or carry on the rest of the game and that sort of thing. So I think keeping them moving is important, but I think we can do the extreme for both, right? You can have teams that are, and I get messages about this too. You can have teams that are all fun and games. They really do nothing that teaches them anything about baseball. So when they do go play games, even if it's against other rec teams, they're destroyed because the kids don't know how the basic fundamentals of baseball because all they do is kick ball and pick flowers. But on the other hand, you can be very extreme where, a kid who's 5, 6, 7 years old who is showing some level of skill, you're going to be pushing them too hard, like they're in a 12U travel ball team. And that's not good either. So I'm very much about just the middle ground and also sort of like man management, right? I've heard that in like professional sports. Like good coaches are good man managers, meaning that I might treat this person a little bit differently than that person because I know this person responds to this sort of criticism and that person responds to that. And so, as much as I treat the kids equally, I do try to individualize being their coach and making sure that I'm supporting them in the way that they need, which is different than the kid over here's.
Yeah. No, I think that's really crucial because I think the better you know the kids, especially when you've been coaching the same kids for a long time, definitely helps because you're right. The kids kind of react differently to things, and so having a sense of in the same way, if you know that certain kids struggle with different things, being mindful of that and how you approach practices and communication, can be
Hmm.
can be really important. And so I
Hmm.
think that just well, obviously there is the element of trying to treat them equally at the same time. It's kind of like with parenting that you
Right.
could have two kids that are the same family but they're very different, and you may even if you try to keep the rules the same, you may parent them differently because their needs are different. So it's kind of the same
Exactly.
thing with coaching. So I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. I think one of the other things I think is really important, as part of that idea is, the idea of structure. So for
Hmm.
the idea of, a lot of practices have some element of structure to them, but, for example, like a warm up, which I mean, functionally is helpful in terms of
Hmm.
just, getting moving, but also,
Right.
kids like, the routine often helps, like to have that routine to start of knowing what to expect. But I think sometimes also like, I recommend this to coaches in general is always to step back, like, and look at kind of what's working and what's not. Because sometimes like little tweaks can make a huge difference. Like, so for example, like where people are positioned. So for example, having kids stretch standing on a line versus, in a circle. Like if kids have a hard time standing still, doing it on the line, and this goes for other
Hmm.
sports, not just baseball, that can really help. Or for
Hmm.
example, with basketball, if you look at like let's say kids like to dribble their ball a lot and aren't great about listening to put the ball away or stop shooting to do whatever the activity is. If you have the stretch on a line and collect all of the balls when you start practice, you're not tripping over balls during practice, and kids don't have that temptation when there's any sort of gap in the transition from one activity to next to go and
Hmm.
shoot.
Hmm.
I mean, baseball, it's a little different. I mean, you can have a bucket of balls out, but kids don't really have their own baseball typically in quite the same way as
Yeah.
basketball.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I
But
like,
I
I
think the
kind of
idea of
like,
the transitions and having a plan for the transition, I think, does help a lot in terms of keeping things moving as well.
yeah. And I like what you sort of alluded to there, which is kind of like giving some of the kids a job. So some of the things that help some of the kids that I coach is making sure they have a specific job, right? So they're helping me clean up. I know this kid likes picking up the balls and he'll get frustrated when other kids try to pick up the ball he's picking up or whatever. And so I try to designate like, all right, you're my guy. You're my guy helping clean up the balls, or you're the one helping to clean up the cones or whatever. I know this kid likes to run. And so the balls that are over by the fence, way over there, like I'm going to tell him go pick them up as fast as he can. And it's sort of that man management mentality, right? Is like trying to encourage supporting the kid the way they need to be supported and giving them a job that makes them feel like they're part of the team, and sort of those life lessons like in a youth sports environment I feel like are helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the same thing with even like, when you're switching from one activity to next, the idea of giving someone a job. Like if there's someone that tends to kind of, get distracted easily or kind of messes around a lot and, creates other issues, being able to basically give them a task to do. So say,
Hmm.
here are the cones, this is our next activity. Can you set this up for us? Or can you do this or that? Like kind of the same thing you were mentioning, but I think doing that even at help transition from one activity to the next, can be very useful as well.
Exactly. Yep, totally agree.
And I think one of the other things around this is, we're talking obviously a lot about the structure of practices and things with kids, but the other part of it also is how does the coach react to things? Because that also says a lot in terms of, I'm sure you've seen sort of with, different teams you played against, coaches obviously really vary and, how much do they yell and how
100%.
worked up do they get? How do they deal with the other team if there's a conflict or disagreement over rules or something like that? And so
Hmm.
I think that's such an important thing that I think people don't always think about of, as a youth coach, you're a role model for the kids and they're going to listen to you. They're ideally, they're going to watch you. And so being
Hmm.
respectful and, handling yourself in the way that you would want them to do it themselves is really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point because you sort of forget that you're playing a role of a parent in that situation. Sometimes the parents they're at the field, but maybe they step away from the field because they don't want to be shouting or distracting their kid and they want them to have the hour and a half to be in practice, but not have the parents like overlooking them. And so in that instance, you're kind of acting as that parent like a teacher does or like anyone else in their life does. That's a very hard thing to do when you're someone like me who's, rushing to practice after your 9 to 5 and you're running a little bit late and you're not there early to set up like you wanted to be and you're changing in the car and you didn't eat dinner and you had a stressful day at work and you have to like take an opportunity to make sure you're decompressing in the car ride on the way from whatever it is you're coming to practice to make sure you don't carry that over. So stuff happens at work all the time that stresses me out. I know everybody else has stressful jobs and stressful things outside of their job and outside of baseball we're all dealing with a lot. But it's very important that when you walk into the field or the court or the practice facility or whatever sport you're trying to play or coach, to leave all that outside because that kid might have had a great day and you don't want to carry your stuff over and impact them in a negative way. And like you said, during games, there's a clear difference sometimes between the coaches on the other team and my coaches. No one way is the right way to do it. There's not one book that we all follow. Everybody does it differently, but there's certainly something to be said about your style of coaching when at the end of the season a parent comes up to you and says, I really appreciate what you did for my son or my daughter this year and really want you to be their coach next year. I feel like that's a great compliment because it helps you understand that, you were maybe doing it the right way that made somebody want to come back and play again. And so, like I said, kind of earlier about being too serious or too fun, if you can find a good middle ground where people want to come back and want to play again, I feel like that's the line we're trying to walk. But, being a role model is very important. And I just think communicating with the kids' parents and, like you said, getting to know them is an important thing. It's not just your team on Monday night and on Saturday when you play a game. You are communicating with these parents on a regular basis. You don't have to be friends with everybody, but you do have to make some level of effort to learn about them and learn about their situations. And sometimes parents will offer stuff up about their home life that will help you in coaching them. And other times it's a mystery and you just kind of have to react, like you said, in an even keeled way that shows them that they are looking at you and that you have an example that they can follow.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think one of the things that can be very helpful in terms of building a relationship with each player is, sort of say hi to them at minimum when you see them when they first, get
Hmm.
there, like especially if they're kind of
Hmm.
trickling in, to make that time to say hi to them, try to ask some question about what's going on, how's their week been, because a lot of times kids will give a lot of information and get talking. And then it's great because then the next week you can ask, oh, how was that such and such thing that you communicated
Exactly.
before? And so it really helps to build that rapport. And, because I think the idea is, we think of when you think back to, these experiences down the line, what do you want the kids to remember? I mean,
Hmm.
chances are they're not going to remember the record of how your team did in a given season. They're going to remember the experiences on the field, what they learned from it, and
Hmm.
whether they can appreciate in the moment or not, hopefully appreciate sort of the opportunities that you gave them to play, have fun with their
Right.
friends. and the sense of community.
Yep. Yep. Did a thing. I try to do something fun at the last practice of every season. And so I got the idea from someone last season to have all the kids pie me in the face. And so for whatever reason, that's the idea that came into my head. And so they were given a couple pitches. They had to hit a ball. They had to run through first base properly. And if they did that, one of the assistant coaches was there with a little tin with some whipped cream, and they got to shove pie in my face. And the first question I got this season from a kid who was on that team was not like, "Hey, can I play pitcher?" or anything like that. It was, "Are we going to get to pie you in the face again this season?" Like that stuck with him. And again, okay, maybe he's not the best pitcher or the best hitter. He's not somebody I'm developing into some prospect that's going to play for a college team or professionally one day. But this is a kid that had a core memory that he got to pie his coach in the face one time, and he loved it so much he wanted to make sure we can do it again this season. So I agree with you that making memories and doing things that make this fun for them is what keeps them coming back and plays into them becoming better athletes, because once they're having fun, they get some level, they cross some level at some point, and some kids it's earlier and some kids it's later that I've seen, where it's still fun, but they're wanting to be better, and they want to help their team more, and they want to score more runs. My son has done one pitching lesson because we've gotten some friends who have done that. And I was talking to him about it, and I said, well, do you want to do this? It costs money. It's extra time. Like, you're playing other sports. And I said, why, if you give me a good reason why you want to do it, we can look into maybe doing that over the summer with you a little bit more. And one of his responses was, I want to be really good for my team so that we can score a lot of runs and I can help play good defense so that we win a lot of games. And it's like, okay, I feel like it's starting to transition to him that this is still a fun thing, but he has an active role in whether or not it goes successfully or not. And he's having some level of desire to like do better so that he can help his team do better, and that he can teach some of the kids that are still younger things that'll help the team be better. And so I feel like all of that plays into the overall development of the kid, more importantly than of the baseball player. One of the people I follow on Instagram is Coach Ballgame, and he said something the other day that was talking about creating good baseball players versus creating good humans. And I think creating good humans is the more important thing there. If they become great baseball players, great. But if they become great fathers, great mothers, great dentists, great doctors, then you had a part in that, because our role should be to create a good human first.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that post as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it reminds me of kind of this idea. I think I've seen a quote somewhere. This idea that I think it's like in elementary school and middle school, like a good season is measured not by number of wins, but by the number of kids who sign up the next season
Yeah.
to come
100.
back.
Yeah.
Kind of what
Totally
you mentioned
agree.
before. That I think and again, obviously people stop sport for different reasons, but I think the fact that kids that want it, whether they love the sport or enough that they want to play with friends, I
Hmm.
think it says a lot if they feel connected to the team, the coach, and want to keep doing it because
Yeah.
they find value in it. Whether
Yeah.
they want to excel in baseball or any sport they're playing, or just play enough to have fun with it.
Right.
Obviously, they should be having fun no matter what. But I think that just illustrates the point that sort of having a good setup can really help. Like if they feel valued, they're getting a lot, boosting their self esteem. Because if a kid gets really frustrated, or they feel like they're being yelled at a lot, that kind of stuff obviously can really weigh on someone and make them less likely to want to play a sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had some parents that have come up to me and said thank you at the end of the season, and have told me stories about nephews or relatives that, dropped out of baseball or whatever sport because their coach was overly aggressive, and they didn't really feel like there was a balance between, like, this isn't like a serious competition or anything. This is just recreational. And so getting compliments like that where people say, I appreciate what you did, and he had a great season and he wants to come back and play for you again, is just more ammunition for me to realize that I'm on some level of the right track, and I don't have it all figured out, but in some way, shape, or form, I'm doing something right, because these kids are wanting to come back, and not only come back and play the sport again, but come back and play on my team. And so that's the best compliment I can get. Like I told them at the beginning of the season this year, I don't care how many wins we have. We don't even really track score. I mean, we sort of track the score, but there's no standings or anything. So we know that we have to switch innings at 4 runs or 3 outs. And so there's a general idea of what the score is. And some teams do keep, like their stats on Game Changer already. I don't do that, but I do keep the score in my head. And so I have an idea of how we're playing, but there's never like hey guys, we're 5-10. We got to start picking it up. I've told them at the beginning of the season that I don't really care if they lose every game, but if I see that they're trying and that they're having fun and that they're putting in effort, then I think we'll be having a great season. So we tried to establish that mindset from the beginning. And so far it's stuck. They get a little cranky when they realize the other team is pretty good, and that's going to happen. But we've responded in some instances where we're being blown out. And then the last inning, something just clicks and they all start deciding we're just going to have fun and they score 4 runs like it's nothing. And then we talk about how if we play like that every day, nobody can ever beat us because you guys were locked in and you were having fun. And so we just try to build on that throughout the season.
Yeah, and that's sort of how sports go. You get some games where you're doing really well and get excitement, and others where it's a blowout or a very close game and you pull it out and win, and others you don't. But it's also that idea about having the resiliency to
Hmm.
kind of keep working at it. That whether you're down by a run or 10, the idea of continue to work at it.
Hmm.
To sort of, until it's the last out, to keep going because you never know what's going to happen technically. And so
Hmm.
that, kind of the perseverance and, and just the mindset. Because for kids, especially, obviously you see in professional sports as well, it's, when you're down by a lot, it's very easy to kind of be down on yourself and, you start not doing well. But the idea of being able to
Hmm.
kind of ignore the score and just focus on, each play as its own sort of almost as if it's a new game in a sense, and then really making a comeback by just, doing well, making
Right.
that change. It's, about the idea, but also the same way where, if you lose a game for the kid, I always think it's really interesting when you look at youth sports and at the end of the game, like you look and basically based on, the kids, how they shake hands, and everything, sometimes like if you can't actually tell who won the game based on
Right.
like the reactions, it's sort of a
Yeah.
sign that, there's certainly being a good sport, but that there becomes a focus more on play and not just, oh, we won a game. Like, I mean, obviously
Right.
you see kids sometimes really celebrating, but also
Yeah.
I always think it's interesting when I look at and see some games where it's, you know, I you just sort of see that it's, they check in and kind of walk, but but I think what it also
Yeah.
says in the end, it's not just about winning.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm a sports fan. I love basketball. My favorite team's the Orlando Magic. Super happy the other day when they beat the Pistons. I'm really hoping we can pull this out.
Yeah.
But there have been plenty of games where I've watched where I've turned it off and I've been like, this team is trash. They can't win a game. They're down by 25. I check the next morning, they win by 6. And they've had some major comeback. And so I think that's a good lesson there, though, right? Is that we have to, coaches in professional sports have to remind their players that the game is not over until the game is over. There's always a chance to come back. And more often than not, sometimes that doesn't happen. But there are opportunities where, and there's great stories in baseball and basketball and football about comeback wins and unprecedented victories from what looked like just being dead on the floor. But if we're still doing that for pro athletes, then it's totally fine to be telling kids that, hey, we still got plenty of time. It's not a problem. Have fun. So some people would see that as, well, you're not trying to play hard enough or whatever. And I just disagree with that. I think if we're teaching that for adults still, that it's something we can continue telling the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really good advice. And I think it's just something I was thinking about. You, I think, mentioned or sort of started to get a little bit a few minutes ago. Is thinking about kind of the different levels of play. In the idea, I think a lot of times there's this focus for kids on how quickly can you move to select or travel ball and things like that. But I think I think first of all, even if a child is good enough to play at those, doesn't necessarily mean that that's truly the right fit for them to start. And also, I think there's something to be said to kind of taking that step back and not rushing to play at a higher level.
Hmm.
Enjoying the rec league and things like that as long as you can. I mean, I think the caveat is figuring out like if the child is especially good, are they being challenged enough where they can play and feel like they're kind of continue to improve? Because again, if there's such a skill level difference, that can certainly make it harder if the other kids can't keep up and inhibiting play. But I think as long as everyone sort of is at a certain minimum level, then I think you can sort of navigate that for a longer time on a rec team.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting topic and has really it's been pretty surprising how much engagement you get on a post that talks about, are you still in little league or travel ball, or did you move your kid up to this division or that division? Because people get really heated about that and there's a lot of opinions out there. And I just think like what you said is true, that it's individual per the kid and per the family, right? Like you might be the best player on the team and you might be good enough to start playing for a travel ball team, but is that a good fit for your family? Financially, time wise, all sorts of reasons. So, I think sometimes we get comparisons of like, well, you can't do it for this reason or that reason. I just don't think that there's a brush you can paint everybody with on that question. Is it a good fit? Right. And, some people do. I did a post the other day about that same thing. Like, why did you leave Little League? Because again, I'm more focused on Little League and I'm curious why people don't want to do it because I want to help improve it. It was such a big thing in my life growing up and I want it to be there for as long as it can be. And so a lot of people are leaving for travel ball. So I'm curious as to why. And some people do both, and some people hate travel ball, and some people hate little league. But I think it's whatever is best for your family. Is don't compare yourself to other kids. Don't compare yourself to other families. Just do what you think is right for your own kid, and let the chips fall where they may. And if they're disappointed that their friends are leaving for travel ball and they're staying, that's a factor in your decision making. But I think comparison can sometimes remove the element of these are just good times with your kids that go very, very fast. My son is already in, like the third division in Little League, right? Where we did T ball, and then we did minors A, and now we're in minors double A. And like before you know it, he's going to be 12 or 13. And, maybe he'll play high school baseball, maybe he won't, but he won't be playing Little League anymore as a little kid that he's doing now. And I just think it's important that things go by very fast. Life is fragile, and that we just enjoy the time that we have now. And if it's working for you, then great.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to sort of cherish, each step of the way for kids because, they grow up fast. Same thing with, the sports sort of, if you're happy where you are, there's not necessarily a reason to make that change. But I also think in a lot of ways, I think what I've seen just in general is a lot of times if you have, a lot of kids that sort of stay on a team for a very long time, rec teams can be competitive for a very long time. I think it's when you start kind of, everyone kind of leaves or a lot of people leave and then it impacts kind of it creates an even like wider skill level
Yeah.
range. That's where I think it starts to throw things off more, especially, playing teams that have been together for a very long time.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's been successful for me, or that's played into some level of why I keep coming back, is we have had a core group of kids since T-ball. We've had one season here or there where a kid hasn't participated, but we generally have a core set of kids and assistant coaches and team parents and people that help out. And so we've seen the kids grow from T-ball. And so they want to come back and they want to play with the same team, not only because they feel like they're getting better, but because they're having fun, like we talked about. And so when that switches up because kids are leaving or whatever, then I think it does introduce a new dynamic. I'm not quite there yet, but I think I'm on my way there because some of the kids on my team are considering moving up a division next year. Some of the kids are considering travel ball. Some of the kids play other sports and are considering other things like travel hockey. And Florida hockey is not very easy to get to. There's like 17 rinks in the whole state or something is what my buddy told me. So travel for that is a lot more work than travel baseball in Central Florida. So, I think we're getting to that sort of line where we may be experiencing the loss of the kids that from the core group since T-ball go off and do other things. And, that's disappointing. And it's sad to see that core group get separated. But I'm also happy for those kids because if they're getting to a place where they're realizing like, I love hockey, like I want to play that, I want to put my time into that, then that's what I would want for them too. So I think we're not quite there yet, but one of the reasons I've enjoyed doing this is because I have that consistency. So I totally get coaches that are hesitant to return or hesitant to sign up in the first place because they don't know anybody in their community, they don't know anybody in their neighborhood, their kids don't have a lot of friends, and so they're going to have to figure that out, and it's intimidating to some people. And
Yeah.
so I try not to take for granted the fact that I've had that level of support since T-ball.
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. But I think it also, to your point, for someone, if their child doesn't have a lot of friends, it actually can be an opportunity to sort of step up and help them because you really create done right can really create a nice sense of community with a team, especially if it's kids from your child's school.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely
even if
agree.
not, it still can be a good sense of community. But I think
Right.
that it's another way for kids to have like a built-in ability or opportunities to kind of socialize outside of school. Because if you don't have play dates and you don't do other activities, then kids don't have a whole lot of opportunities to socialize outside of school. So sports create a nice way where you get, and again, there's informal time here and there with practices, and certainly baseball. I mean, sitting on the bench waiting to bat, you get a fair amount of
Right.
downtime in baseball
Yeah, that's
to
true.
socialize
Yeah, and
on the
they get
bench
they get
usually.
kinda
So,
rowdy in there. I don't know if you have that experience or if you've got some tips for me, but, like, keep your butt on the bench is yelled at constantly by the team dugout moms that they get a little rowdy in there sometimes. But to me, I feel like those are opportunities for them to bond, and as long as they're being safe and not climbing the fence or doing ridiculous things or whatever. But, I mean, they're kids, and I totally agree with you because it's cool to see kids that we've had on the team before that I know enjoyed our team, but for whatever reason got picked on another team or whatever. And so when we're playing them, they high five the friends they used to have. And so they're building this community of people that they don't see regularly, but they still remember like, oh, I remember he was on our team when we were the Angels or whatever. And so they'll high five or some of the kids have moved up a division because of the age. And so when we're at the fields and their team is playing, my son will want to be sitting in the bench, sitting in the bleachers for a little bit because he's like, oh, I want to watch them and see if they've gotten any better or whatever. And so it does build some extra level of relationships outside of like your normal routine of school and whatever, like you said, play dates or whatever you have going on.
Yeah, and to answer your question about the dugout, and again, obviously, kids do different things at different ages. I mean, one of the things, especially when they're younger, to work well, is the idea of basically write their name on a piece of tape, put the tape on the bench, and then sit the kids in batting order on the bench,
Hmm.
because this way they're ready to go to be on deck to bat, and
Hmm.
this way you're not yelling so and so, you're up to bat and trying to look around and find them, and the kids aren't jumping
Hmm.
all over the fence. So like
Yep.
it just helps them to sort of stay seen and have a set thing. What I've also tried, or what I've used at times, is I guess slow baseball maybe, but probably more so other sports too, is that can be very helpful are hand fidgets. So like something like this, basically if you have, because baseball, because you're sitting on the bench, there's a lot of downtime. So like having something like
Yeah.
that, where you just hand out a pack of fidgets and the kids can sort of use
Yeah.
it while they're sitting. Same thing with basketball or other sports when they're on the side, or soccer when they're on the sidelines. Like if you have a lot of kids that have a hard time sitting still, if they have something like that, it's a nice way to kind of channel some of that fidgeting or,
Hmm.
wanting to mess around and make it a
Yep.
little bit easier to stay focused on what's going on in the game. They may also be more likely to play with that and watch the game while they're
Yeah.
playing with it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that idea. Like we talked about earlier, I think giving some of the kids a job too is good because, water bottles knock over and people's helmets, their gloves don't make it in the right spot or whatever. And so if you can have a kid be like, hey, listen, I need you to be my assistant coach in the dugout. If you see a water bottle knocked over, I need you to pick it up, right? Mom and dad paid a lot for that water bottle. Sometimes it's a super expensive one for some reason. I don't get why, but sometimes they are. And, if you see it knocked down, pick it up. Or if you see that your buddy's bat is on the ground, can you go give it to the dugout mom so she can hang it back up on the rack? And so giving them a job or some sense of like belonging in the dugout too helps. But I love the idea of something that isn't like a screen where they're going to ignore you for the time they're in the dugout, but maybe something they can just do with their hands while they're still being able to cheer for people who are running the bases or at bat or something. I think that's a great idea.
Yes, yeah. No, I think the idea of like, and I was recommend as a coach in general for people listening out there is, if you're identifying there's some issue or something that could be improved, take that step back and think about, here's this issue. Let me think through, not in the heat of the moment in practice or a game, what's going on and how I can make this better. Because the problem is if you don't reflect back and like evaluate what worked well at practice, what didn't, or in a game, you're not going to sort of make improvements. I mean, like other things, like if you think about like other kind of common things, like staying focused in the outfield is one example, or running through first base. I mean, with running through first base, I mean, I think even if you do it at practice a lot and kids really know what they're doing in practice, there's just something about that I think takes a long time for kids to really master in an actual game. I mean,
Oh,
when kids are
100.
really little, I mean, minimum, having, the base coach stand behind first base and hold their glove out and the kids, give a high five, so they run through first base can help. For younger kids, you can even do it with stickers, where basically the base coach has a sticker, and when they run through first base, you give them a sticker, and if the child made it past first base, you give them a sticker when they get to home plate or something. But like, for that creates sort of an instant reward for little kids to help.
Yeah.
But it also creates that visual cue of what to do in the moment. Because I think that's the hard part. That even if you remind them a million times to run through first base, unless they have that cue right in that moment as they're running, they're less likely in the moment to think about it because they just want to be safe on the base. And because it's different than the other bases, they're not really. It's hard. It's just I think it's a harder concept for kids to get sometimes.
Yeah, I've literally seen people hand out pieces of candy for doing stuff. Now, I don't necessarily think it was for doing anything other than you got a hit, here's a piece of candy. That's probably not something I'm going to do because then they're in the dugout like, can I have some more candy? Or can I have another gummy bear or whatever?
Oh
And
yeah, and
so
then the sugar
that,
high.
yeah, that was not like an idea I thought would work for me, but I'm glad it worked for them. But yeah, I mean, doing something visually, we set up cones in practice and try to do that. But any sort of visual attempt to help them, do the thing you want them to do. I'm a very visual person. Like I said, I'm in my mid to late 30s, and so these kids sometimes need some level of visual, whether it's a line in the dirt or a glove, like you said, or a hand, or even some sort of reward. Whatever you can do that works for your team, it doesn't need to be conventional. It doesn't need to be something the other team would do. And another coach might say, like, oh, I've never heard somebody do that before. It doesn't matter because, again, don't compare yourself to other people. Know your kids and know what works for them.
Exactly. No, I think that's good advice. And it's important to sort of think outside the box with it. I mean, like one of the I had just thinking about, because one of the big issues I see a lot, or in general and hear about too, is the idea of staying focused in the outfield. So
Hmm.
one of the things that my favorite things just for this, I like to call it the pop fly shuffle. But with the idea basically that you have the kids in the right position to catch a pop fly in the outfield, so they're kind of ready, and then you yell or pop fly shuffle, and then they move 2 steps to the right, 2 steps to the left. And
Hmm.
they can either do it as a team, or just kids can learn to do it themselves when they start to feel unfocused. But it gives them like a separate routine to do in the moment to stay focused. And then it just creates something sort of fun, and prevents them, because otherwise, I mean, I'm sure you may have seen, when kids are unfocused, it's very challenging. That it can be hard. Obviously it can become a safety issue as well if kids
Yeah.
aren't paying attention, the ball's coming right at. So I think
Yeah. I mean,
having something where they're already kind of in the right position, kind of trains them to then refocus in.
yeah. I mean, we talked about literally that same thing at practice today, which was, being baseball ready and that typical stance of a kid who's ready to receive the ball. And, so we're working on like the prep steps and taking a little hop or whatever for the kids that are really starting to get it. But the idea is just if I see you and you're twirling in the dirt and doing what I did with my cleat, which is just make a big circle and see if I could make it a perfect circle with the cleats, or playing with clay in the dirt and throwing it into the grass, it does become a safety issue. So yes, I want you to pay attention and be involved, but we do we are at the age level where kids are hitting legitimate baseballs at a high rate of speed, and some of them are line drives. And some kid, if he's not paying attention, and that's the first thing that's gonna get them to not play this sport again, in my opinion, which is I got seriously hurt and I'm not doing this anymore. And we have that experience with people who get hit when they're batting, right? Now they're afraid to go back in the batter's box. They might come out and play, but they just freeze when they swing. And so, it is a safety issue, but anything you can do to sort of get them engaged. And one thing is to make sure that the outfield isn't a punishment. There's a legitimate reason there are outfielders. They have jobs. They have jobs when plays don't go to them. And so, our league has rules that make sure that our kids are playing 2 innings in the infield. In the division I'm in the lower division we came from, we generally only get 4 innings in. It's usually what we get. Rarely we get five, but it's usually four. And so 2 of those innings, everybody's got to play in the infield somewhere. And so we're rotating that a lot. And I think that takes away the shame of like, I'm sending you to the outfield, because there is a job out there. And we've had kids catch pop flies, and that's an important role. And we've had kids throw out people from outfield to home plate, with a cutoff, and they make awesome plays. And it's not a punishment to be out there. And so getting them in any position, getting them baseball ready, getting them paying attention. And we talked about knowing what you're going to do with the ball before it comes to you. And every pitch that's going through, even if he's not swinging or if it's a ball or whatever, you should be actively thinking like, what do I do if I get the ball? What do I do if my teammate over there gets the ball? And if you're just staring in the dirt and looking around and not paying attention, that's my sign that you're not doing that. And so we talk about that today, of just always be thinking while you're out there, like, what do I do with the ball? So just assume the ball is coming to you and know what you're going to do with it before it comes to you.
No, exactly. And I think if you need, so young kids, if they need something to kind of create that mentality to think about it, the idea of, count the number of pitches, ask the
Hmm.
child, count the number of pitches, and then, go back and check with them how many pitches until the person either hit the ball or struck out.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, like again, giving them a job or having them engage in the game, and maybe something that's unconventional or what have you. But how many have a kid who is always pretending apparently that they're the umpire, and like, because I have to call balls and strikes from behind the pitcher in our league. We don't have umpires, and so when my team is pitching, I'm calling balls and strikes. And often the kids in the infield are telling me it's 0-2 or whatever. And it's like, nope, it's 2-1. Like, thank you, I got it. I got the clicker and everything. But like, if they're in the outfield, tell them call balls and strikes and tell me what you saw. Like, was he throwing all balls or was he throwing mostly strikes, or doing something to keep them engaged? That's a great idea.
That sounds like a lot of pressure, having to sort of call balls and strikes for your own team.
I do not like it at all, and I don't have any solution to it, because it's the responsibility of the pitching team to call it. And so, we're in this league where the strikes, if it's hittable, you want the kid to swing, and if it's near the strike zone, you want to get the pitcher to be confident that he's throwing strikes. And so it's really hard, because you'll throw a pitch that's like probably a ball, but the kid could have easily swung at it and people are calling it a strike. And sometimes I am and the other coaches. And what I'd love is the other coaches team to be behind home plate, like up against the fence, not behind the catcher, and give me like a little nod or a little no to give me some level of like agreement that we're on the same page. Cause then if we switched it up and had the batting team called balls and strike, then there's inherent bias in all of that. And so it's like, why don't we just have an umpire so we don't have to deal with it? It is a lot of pressure. And you feel like the other parents are like, that wasn't a strike, but they don't know the context of what we're trying to deal with, which is we want the kids to swing and all this kind of stuff. So it is a lot. It is not, I always look at an assistant coach like, you want to call balls and strikes today? And they're like, no, I'm good. Thanks. And so I
Yeah,
get
but
stuck with it
I think it
sometimes,
helps
but
also when you have a second, parent or coach for certain things. Like
oh
even
yeah.
just even like because if you have to call, someone out or safe at a base, if it's like really close or you didn't have a super great view at it from where you were, like having that
Hmm.
second person to sort of verify what you saw
Yeah.
and make sure it was accurate, can definitely be
Yeah.
helpful and reassuring. And again, but at the same time, also like teaching kids, like if there's a disagreement on the field over the call, to just obviously depends on the severity of it, but to sort of handle it in an appropriate way, like you don't want to be yelling at the other coach, you're
Right.
wrong. The person was out, the person was
Yeah.
safe. Like figure out an
Yeah.
appropriate way to handle. And again, also I think depends on the circumstances in the game. And if your team is up by a ton, maybe if it's very close, maybe especially that you just let it be.
Oh, I
But
totally
it's
agree. And
hard.
that,
But I think when it's also if it impacts the outcome of the game, I think it's very different if you feel strongly if the call was incorrect and you're having an
yeah.
argument over it because it's not like you have an instant replay option. Unless,
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
guess if someone filmed it, but obviously that in itself
Yeah.
is something you
I'm
probably
waiting for the
rely
first
on
kid
decision.
and I'm waiting for the first 8-year-old to start doing this and like we have some ABS system or something. Nobody's done it yet, but
Yeah, well, I was
every
thinking
now
about
and
that in
then,
terms of I guess with the MLB doing it, yeah, at some
yeah,
point in the future, maybe, it gives you a little
yeah,
having
who
some
knows?
sort of
But
option
there'll be
to
enough technology out there that there'll be cameras everywhere or something. But every now and then I look at like our team and I'll do this and we'll start laughing because it's like somebody check that. But like you said, I had a kid pitching. We had a game yesterday, and he pitched like 4 or 5 strikes in a row, which is unusual for not only him but basically for all the pitchers in our league right now. And I don't know the kid at bat, but we've played them before, and so I knew the kid was struggling with swinging, and you can just see from the stance and the swing that a little nervous, a little scared. And so the last thing I want to do is call 1, 2, 3 strike, you're out. And so he was down 0-2, and the pitcher threw a strike that was what I would normally call a strike for like maybe a more confident batter, but I gave him a ball. And I told the pitcher, like, listen, you're throwing too good to make me call that a strike. Like you can throw a better one. He ended up striking him out on a swing, but to your credit, like there is some level, this is rec, like this is recreational. And so if you are winning by a lot and that kid maybe stepped off the bag and then came back on but got tagged, like if that's the first time he's ever gotten a hit, give him the hit. What's the big deal? Let him have that confidence boost. So I agree, like situational awareness of like, do we really need to call that a strike? Or it's difficult though when it's switching coaches every inning. So it's a hard thing to do. That's why umpires are so valuable. But I get that that's a tough job.
Yeah. But it's a fine balance because I think also at the same time, even if it is an actual umpire, if the umpire is not really being consistent in the calls, that
Yeah.
can lead to a lot of frustration with kids if they're you know balls being called as strikes that are over their head or like because they
Right.
want umpire wants to kind of keep the game moving. Yeah, and so
Right.
I think also I think understand what the actual rules are, but also understand for kids to understand sometimes if an umpire or someone is doing that for a reason to sort of so it validates the fact that what they're seeing maybe is not truly accurate, but to understand the rationale behind that may help in some cases for kids to not get quite as frustrated by that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah. I
like I've
agree.
had umpires before that will sort of say if it's a full count, we really don't want a ton of walks. So if it's anywhere with the general vicinity of the strike zone, even if it's not in the strike zone, we're going to call it as a strike. So I've definitely heard umpires tell me that before. So I think the idea is that, but if you know that to then tell your team like that's what they said, then I think that helps
Right.
a little bit because if it's a full count, and if it's anywhere near you, you should
It's
probably just
close. You
swing
got to
because they're going to
swing.
call it a
Yeah.
strike even if it's not a great pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I agree. It's hard when you don't have the umpire to do that. And we try to have, a meeting. I don't say a meeting, but the coaches try to talk before each game to just be like, hey, are we calling like way up high or what are we doing? Some of the kids are not great at pitching yet. And so they'll throw sort of the softball lob and it will come in as a strike, but it really came in at an angle that the kid, that's not a strike. So it looks like one, but it shouldn't be. And then you got some coaches that are calling those because they're, like you said, anywhere near the vicinity is close enough. And then you've got others that are saying like, you can't call that a strike. And so it's very hard when it's nine different teams, and it's not the same coach every time. And so, but I think that's a lesson to teach the kids, right? Is that stuff doesn't go your way sometimes. And if you react negatively and throw your bat and you get frustrated, it's going to affect the rest of your game and you might not play well. But if you let it go and try to go back out there with a better attitude next time and a more focused span of what do I swing at, you might hit a double. And so it's a good lesson that they have to learn that the game isn't always fair. So, but I agree that if you can give them that context ahead of time, especially the younger kids, hopefully they're a little less likely to have a pretty negative reaction when it is something that was unfair or not called right.
Exactly. So, all right. And that is a great conversation. I think I feel like I could talk forever on this, but obviously
Yeah, I
I
could
want to be
talk. I could
mindful of
talk
the time.
baseball all the time. Yeah, no, I could too. So I get it.
I guess where can people find you? So if they want to reach out to you, where is a good place for them to find you?
So my main source is Instagram. I started that Instagram page almost a year ago, and so my handle is at Coach Dad Life FL. I try to do my best to respond to all the messages. So far, I've done pretty good at making sure I reach back out. But I'm open to questions or advice. If you see something in my videos that I'm doing wrong, or you see a better way of doing it, please tell me. I am not the end all be all. I am just a normal dad. I don't pretend to be some coaching expert, but Instagram is the place that I spend most of my time. I have videos that post to Facebook. There's a lot of hate on Facebook. I got to be honest with you. And so I try not to really focus on comments and messages over there. So Instagram is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
That sounds good. Well, I'll make sure definitely a great account. That's how we connected.
Yeah.
And I'll put all that information in the show notes as well. Um,
Awesome.
so, and for
I
those of you,
appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. And I know you have some practice plans, some other stuff, which is great. So definitely some great resources. So definitely everyone should check that out. And I will put all that again in the notes. And if you like this episode, definitely like it, share with a friend, and subscribe so you can be aware of when future episodes come out as well. Hope you've enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. And thanks again for being on today.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate what you do, and we need more voices like you out there in youth sports. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks. You
Thank you. I appreciate it.